Great. So what I'm going to be talking about today is how we're using R at Leaply to understand a lot more about the dynamics of graduate recruitment in the South African labour market. And this is work that comes out of the research work that Leila Shirley did at the University of Stellenbosch and has since been picked up by us at the Leaply Data Science group. Before I start, just a quick thanks to Andrew and the satRday organizing team. It's great to be back. 2017 satRday really changed my life. And you'll probably see some of that here. And thanks to the team who put it together, and thanks to the sponsors, and I think our consortium who providing some of the funding. So we know that race, gender, socioeconomic class are really important in terms of outcomes in the labour market. And we know that by our lived experience, and we also know that because there's lots of empirical evidence that shows that this is the case. So here are two examples of seminal papers in economics which show this. So the first is Claudia Golden and Cecilia Rouse, and they looked at what happens when orchestras start recruiting behind a screen, so that the recruiters can no longer see the characteristics, the outward characteristics of the people playing the instruments, and they find that female musicians do a lot better than if the recruiters can see them. Second example here is Marianne Bertrand and Sundal, I want to say Muraliteran, but it's Mulay Nathan, and they looked at, they sent out a bunch of applications with names that were identifiably African American and names that were identifiably white. And you can see that that had a big impact in the US labour market. So white names were likely to receive 50% more callbacks than these African American names, and these callbacks were much more responsive to the quality of the CVs for white candidates compared to African American candidates. Now, given South Africa's history, this is obviously really important. So what did apartheid do? One of the things it did was it excluded people with certain characteristics from certain parts of the labour market. And then we had, in 1998, we had the Employment Equity Act, which tried to right some of this and put in place legislation that said, well, we've got to have affirmative action, and companies need to think about, in much more detail, who they employ. And given this history, what we have in the labour market is we often have people who are applying for jobs being from a different race or socio-demographic group to those people who are recruiting. And so this may create some sort of barrier or lack of understanding or empathy from both sides. So there's lots of moral and potentially ethical reasons why we should worry about it. There's also potentially efficiency reasons why we should worry about this, because if candidates are, or if companies are recruiting based on socio-demographic or racial characteristics, they may be missing out on people who would be good at the job but just happen to look different. So what do we do at Leaply, and why are we interested in this? Well, what Leaply does is it's a graduate recruiter platform. So it brings together predominantly university graduates and predominantly South African large corporate entities who are looking to recruit these graduates into their graduate recruitment programs. So all the big banks, a lot of the law firms, MTN, Vodacom, they all run these graduate recruitment programs. At Leaply, you can join. You have access to all these opportunities. We've got close to 50,000 unique users. Many of these users make multiple applications. We have hundreds of opportunities on there. So we can really see what's happening in the graduate recruitment space in South Africa. We're also the 2017 winner of the South African Graduate Employer Association for the Best Supplier Partnership. People who use the platform like it, so if you're on the job market, please check us out. Okay, so how do we use R at Leaply? So we run all our analysis in the data team through R, and we have a workflow that I learned at satRday 2017. So all our data lives in a PostgreSQL database. We access that, and we write our scripts. We do our reports in RMD. We version control thanks to Jenny Bryan's excellent Happy Git with R. We do that all through RStudio. I make a lot of mistakes. I have to burn things down, but it works really well. We can make changes on the fly, and it updates automatically. What kind of data are we using? Well, when candidates register, they report all this demographic data about themselves, so their gender, their race, their age. We know the institutions that the applicants have studied through. We know the degree. We know their aggregate. They put a photo there. They write a cover letter, a bio. And also importantly, we know about the other applicants in that pool. So we know what the composition of the applicant pool is for an opportunity. And in this process, applicants go through various stages. What I'm talking about today is essentially this first stage. Someone applies for a job or an opportunity. If they meet all those criteria, that's a valid application. And then someone in the client organization which has posted the opportunity then advances them to the next stage. So they go into some sort of shortlisting pool. And this is what we're calling success here, this advancement to the next stage. So we've got about, in this data set, we've probably got about close to 50,000 observations where we've seen either successful or not successful applications. And so what we're asking here is, are recruiters potentially missing good candidates? And how does this kind of success correlate with things like socio-demographic status, race, gender, that type of thing? So what do we see? So this is what we see. This is success. Remember this, passing the first stage by race. And I'll just let this sink in a little bit, but what do we see? This red line is candidates who classify themselves as black. And what you see here is this is very flat compared to their aggregates. Okay, so regardless of if you're a black candidate, whether you scored 90% or 60%, you have about the same probability of success to advance to the next stage. If you're a white candidate, that changes dramatically. So if you're a white candidate and scored about 60%, you have about the same probability of success as a black candidate. Once you get up here, let's take 80%, there's about a 20 percentage point difference in success based on your race. Okay? White candidates who score 80% are double, how do I say this, double more likely to be successful than black candidates. Okay. Now, coming from a South African background, that may or may not seem surprising. And you might also think, well, there's a bunch of explanations why this might be. Okay, we know on this platform we have people from a wide variety of institutions. In South Africa, we have previously advantaged, previously disadvantaged universities. It may be that, you know, these black candidates are going to previously disadvantaged universities, they're scoring higher, recruiters are discounting that, it might be a bunch of other things. Well, let's have a look at what the ratings say is the best university in South Africa. It's got nice facilities, nice view, and we see something very, very similar. Okay, so and we can see this picture, a similar picture, if we confine this to all the universities that were previously white. So it's not a story of different institutions. It doesn't seem to be a story of different subjects either. There is some indication here that it differs by sector. So if you're a lawyer or a law candidate, these two graphs are very similar. If you're in other sectors, it's quite far apart. Okay, so what else might it be? Well, one of the things that it seems like it might be is that recruiters in their mind are trying to do some sort of mental balancing of candidates according to race. So what makes us think this? Well, this is the number of applicants, and this is the probability of success if you're a black candidate based on the number of applicants and the number of white applicants in your pool. So if you're in a pool with a low number of white applicants, that's the red line. If you're in the median, not medium, but median pool for white applicants, that's the green line. And if you have a high number of white applicants in your pool, that's the blue line. And you can see that at the bottom, if you've got small numbers of applicants in total, and there's a low number of white applicants, you stand a worse chance as a black candidate than if you were in a similar size pool, but there were high numbers of black candidates. So the way I like to think about it is just to think about, imagine there's 10 candidates, there's 1 white candidate and 9 black candidates. Well, what is happening here? Well, if the pool is cut down to 5 candidates, the white candidate will go through, as will 4 of the black candidates. And what does that mean? That means that, the probability of success for that white candidate is a lot higher than for one of those black candidates in the pool. And we think that this is one of the things that's going on. And we can see that as the number of applicants gets higher, this effect kind of goes away, or your probability of success increases. So, it's a sort of a common behavioral economics thing, or behavioral thing, that as the numbers grow, the recruiters are becoming less and less able to hold these numbers in their head, and they're looking at other things. So what else are we looking at which is associated or correlated with success in this data? Well, we've done sort of work on what photos look like. So you could imagine that depending on your socioeconomic background, you have different access to different technologies, like phone, cameras, etc. So do the photos look different? We see that actually having a photo makes quite a big difference in terms of your success, but it doesn't mediate this racial effect. We also see that linking to your LinkedIn profile makes quite a big difference, between 2 and 5 percentage points. But again, doesn't knock out this race effect. And we also see that actually, things like bios and the cover letters that people write are also strongly associated with their racial background. So another thing we learned at satRday 2017 with Julia Silgi, some text analysis, and this is looking at what people write in their personal biographies divided by race. And this is looking at the unusualness of the terms compared to the corpus of words in the applicants. And you can see, what people write. So if you're black, the most unusual word compared to the general corpus is sort of Limpopo, vendor. If you're white, like you're writing about how you do your rowing, or if you're from UCT, how you play golf and surf. Oh no, there's no golf. Sorry, cricket and surfing. So what's it telling us? It's telling us that even like if we're going to move towards some sort of system where we anonymize race and gender, your bio is going to give you away. So that's just a sort of a taste of what we're doing at Leaply to try and think this through and trying to move towards a potentially a less biased way of recruiting in the labour market. And so what are we trying to do from here? Well, we're really trying to figure out where this stuff comes from. Is this race? Is it proxying for something else? And the next steps in this analysis is trying to link in race and gender of the recruiters and see what effect that is having. We're in the process of piloting blind reviews, both in terms of blinding the applications that go to the HR departments, but also in terms of working on recommenders that don't rely on gender and race to recommend candidates. Now, that's really difficult because obviously race is highly correlated with institution, it's highly correlated with a lot of other things. And then we're working at trying to nudge some of the candidates who perhaps have good chances but haven't put in profile pics or written a decent bio to actually try and improve them, to improve their chances so that they are potentially able to compete with some of these other candidates. So that's where we are at Leaply. I'm very happy to take some questions if we've got some time.
Thank you, Neil. Does anybody have any questions? I hope so, because
I want to say the data says we must start with a question from female.
Yes.
Because that sets the tone.
Is there any ladies have any questions? Maëlle?
Very practical questions. It was a fascinating talk. Are you going to write about it somewhere on the blog?
Yeah, so we're wearing two hats here. I mean, one is an academic hat, where hopefully we can push this in an academic sense and have a paper out. The second is, we'll hopefully write about it. It's a sensitive topic, particularly in a South African context. So we'd like to work through this a little bit more before we start just pushing it into the public domain.
Thank you. One of the key issues in terms of recruitment is BEE status of the recruiting company. How do you think that affects your work?
So, I mean, that's a very good and interesting question. So these are all big corporates. So they generally all they'll have a similar BEE status. I think what matters, and certainly what other literature shows, is that the background of the recruiter makes a difference. And that it's not always same socioeconomic background being better. So sometimes it can be that if you have a white recruiter and a black candidate, that can be better than black on both sides. So, I mean, this is essentially what we want to try and figure out is, does the background of the recruiter make a difference?
Thanks. It was a very interesting talk. I've got a slightly less serious question. Could you go to slide 7? I don't know if anyone else noticed this, but what happens when people are too smart? Because your probability tanks at the end. Are you retardedly smart? Like, what's the definition of people over 90? Because it looks like you want to be good, but not so good that people don't want to employ you.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways to answer this, and I'm going to answer it in the most serious way possible. I mean, you could be up there. Those are confidence intervals. So it's going to depend on the position. So these are often recruiting into a graduate recruitment position. Like if you're smart, you're going to be a data scientist. You're not going to be the guy who walks around in these graduate. You potentially might not be. So I mean that's part of the reason. There's also other work that some colleagues at Stellenbosch and here at UCT have done in the lower parts of the labour market, which shows that recruiters actually don't believe candidates who are too good. So if you have a flawless CV, the recruiters don't believe that. So you've got to introduce some flaws in there.
Thanks, that was a very interesting talk. Just a question from our side. Did you look at any kind of features from the graduate recruiting companies themselves? Because these were sort of more candidate level features. And maybe if you combine them with, the actual job specs and things like that, you might find some other interesting effects. Yeah. So, I mean, this is, again, a good point which we want to push a little bit more. I mean, what we've done at the moment is we control for the opportunity fixed effect. So the unobservable or the constant factors in the opportunity, and the stuff still holds. That doesn't mean that there's other stuff that varies across opportunities that's important. Like I said, if you're a law student, very little difference between races. Other less, let's call them less transformed industries, there's more difference. So there's a whole area here that we can pick apart. We don't have too much on that, and it's we'd have to work quite hard in classifying some of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm getting the last question. To what extent are recruiters recruiting their full complement of grad students through the website, and to what extent are they just topping up maybe an existing grad program?
So they are recruiting. So how it works is all their students for that particular program go through the website. So they may be taking some of these students and positioning them outside of the grad program. They might be making offers. So you come through, they think, oh yeah, you're not going to be a fit for our grad program, but you are going to be good in some other role. So there might be that, but there's very little, as far as we can tell, there's very little external people who get recruited, because what Leaply does as a platform is it standardizes the whole recruitment process. If all the recruiters get the standardized template, it does some filters that you meet all these criteria. So channeling people outside makes a lot more work for HR, and as you know, HR hates work. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil.